Before we begin, take a slow breath. Let the noise of your day fade away. Feel the quiet air around you, the soft brush of a breeze on your skin, maybe the distant rustle of leaves outside your window. Somewhere nearby a candle flickers. The flame sways gently, painting warm shadows on the walls. You can almost hear the soft creak of wood and the whisper of a world settling into night. Now, let's journey together into a night unlike any other. A night that seemed at first ordinary, but before the morning sun rose, it would reshape the destiny of nations. This is one night that changed history. History rarely warns us before it turns. One moment the world feels certain, familiar, and then a single night bends it in another direction. A whisper becomes a rebellion. A spark becomes a war. A decision made in candlelight ripples across centuries. Rome had such a night. Constantinople did. So did London, Berlin, and Hiroshima. Our story tonight belongs to a place that once ruled Europe's heart, and a man whose name would forever echo through history. It was early summer, the year 1815. Europe was weary. The continent had survived a storm that had raged for 2 decades. 20 years of war, ambition, and blood, led by one man, Napoleon Bonaparte. He had risen from obscurity, a soldier from Corsica who became emperor of the French. He commanded empires, humbled kings, and redrew maps. For years, his armies thundered across Europe. But by 1814, the tide had turned. His enemies united, Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia, and cornered him. Paris fell. Napoleon abdicated. He was exiled to a small island in the Mediterranean called Elba. For the first time in a generation, Europe sighed with relief. Peace, fragile and uncertain, settled over the continent. In Vienna, the great powers gathered to rebuild the world. There were banquets and masked balls, whispered alliances and glittering chandeliers. Metternich of Austria presided like a conductor over a symphony of egos. Diplomats toasted to the end of war, to the new order they would create. Yet beneath the laughter there was fear. France, humbled, still simmered with pride. Russia's Tsar dreamed of divine missions. Britain looked outward to its seas and empire. Everyone smiled for peace, but no one truly trusted it. And far away on his small island of exile, Napoleon watched and waited. He was only 45, still strong, his mind as sharp as ever. From the hills of Elba, he could see the ships passing, hear the rumors carried by sailors. He read the newspapers, and as months passed, he realized something that burned deeper than defeat. The world had begun to forget him. That, for Napoleon, was unbearable. On the night of February 26, 1815, he made his move. The sky was clear, the sea still. The moon lit the water like a sheet of silver. Dressed not as an emperor but as a soldier, Napoleon gathered a few hundred loyal men, the remnants of his old guard. They loaded muskets, powder, and food onto a small ship called L'Inconstant. By dawn, the sails caught the wind and Napoleon was gone. He was sailing home. If he failed, he would die a traitor. But if he succeeded, he would reclaim an empire. When he landed on the southern coast of France a few days later, he stepped onto the sand, looked toward the mountains, and said softly, "Here I am. My country will know me." What followed became one of history's most astonishing comebacks. No army waited for him. No nation called him back. But word spread like wildfire. The emperor has returned. At first, soldiers were sent to arrest him. But when they confronted him, Napoleon walked forward alone, opened his coat, and shouted, "If there is one among you who would kill his emperor, here I am." No one fired. The men threw down their weapons, wept, and cried, "Vive l'Empereur!" Village by village, his army grew. By the time he reached Paris, King Louis XVIII had fled. Napoleon was emperor once again. In a matter of days, the map of Europe trembled. But this miracle of return would not last. The powers of Europe, stunned and enraged, formed one last alliance. Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia vowed to destroy him once and for all. Armies gathered once more, marching toward Belgium. By June, the storm was ready to break. For 3 days in mid-June, soldiers clashed across muddy fields in Belgium. Napoleon won at Ligny, defeating the Prussians under Marshal Blücher, but they escaped. He had expected them to retreat east. Instead, they regrouped north, dangerously close to the British army under the Duke of Wellington. Now, it was a race against time. Napoleon had to strike fast, defeat Wellington before the Prussians returned. On June 17, 1815, heavy rain poured over the countryside. Roads turned to rivers of mud. Horses slipped, cannons sank, gunpowder soaked. Napoleon's army camped near a small Belgian village named Waterloo. That night, that single night, would decide the fate of Europe. The fields were soaked and cold. Soldiers huddled under drenched cloaks. Campfires sputtered in the rain, throwing up more smoke than warmth. The smell of wet earth and gun oil hung thick in the air. Officers bent over maps by lantern light, shadows flickering across their faces. The emperor, exhausted, returned to his tent. Napoleon was not the man he once had been. His health was failing. His stomach burned with pain. His uniform was muddy, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. He studied reports from scouts, tracing lines of battle with his finger. Where was Blücher? Were the Prussians beaten or regrouping? If they joined Wellington, the French would be caught between two armies. He could attack now in the dark, but the rain made the ground impassable. His artillery would sink in the mud. The cannons could not be moved. So he made a choice. He would wait for the morning. It seemed a small decision, just a few hours' delay, but those hours changed everything. Across the hills, the British camp prepared in its own uneasy quiet. Wellington sat inside a small farmhouse by candlelight, studying his own reports. He was calm, precise, unshaken. He had fought Napoleon's generals before, but never the man himself. His aides waited for instructions. Wellington looked up, weary but certain, and said, "I expect to be attacked tomorrow, and by God, I think I shall beat him." Outside, his soldiers tried to sleep. Some prayed. Some laughed, pretending they weren't afraid. The rain beat down on their tents, soaking through wool and straw. A few played quiet tunes on pipes, their notes lost in the thunder. In the distance, church bells rang faintly through the storm, the sound of normal life still moving while empires waited in the dark. By 3 a.m, the rain began to fade. Mist crept over the fields like ghostly smoke. French sentries stood guard, staring into the fog, straining to see movement. Somewhere in the gloom, the shape of British wagons moved along the ridge. The sound of hooves echoed faintly and was gone. Napoleon rose before dawn. He stepped outside his tent, wrapped in his gray overcoat, and looked out over the valley through his telescope. The ridge of Mont Saint-Jean stood ahead, a dark line against the lightening sky. Behind it waited Wellington's army. The emperor watched in silence. The ground was still slick, but the clouds were breaking. The sun began to rise. He turned to his marshals. His voice was quiet but firm. "Prepare the man." The night had ended. The day of Waterloo had begun. That night, and that rain-soaked, restless, uncertain night, was the last peace Napoleon Bonaparte would ever know. Before it ended, he was still the master of his destiny, the ruler of a reborn empire. Before the next sunset, everything would fall. The rain has stopped. The world feels still, heavy, damp with the scent of earth. Mist hangs low across the fields near the Belgian village of Waterloo. It is June 18, 1815, the morning of the battle that will decide the fate of Europe. Napoleon stands at the edge of his camp, wrapped in his gray greatcoat, gazing toward the ridge ahead. The ground glistens with puddles, slick and dark. Horses snort and paw the soil, steam rising from their nostrils in the cool air. Around him, aides hurry through the mud, voices muffled, boots splashing. The smell of gunpowder begins to mix with the damp. The emperor's eyes trace the ridgeline. Beyond that rise, he knows, lies Wellington's army, quiet now, invisible in the fog. They are waiting, and so is he. He turns to his generals. "We will begin when the ground is dry enough for the guns," he says softly. The decision buys him a few more hours, but those hours are precious and fatal. By delaying, he gives the Prussian army under Blücher more time to march to Wellington's aid. But Napoleon cannot know that. He believes his marshals will hold them off. He believes, as he always has, that fortune still favors him. For now, the only sound is the slow awakening of an army. Tens of thousands of French soldiers rise from the wet fields. They stretch their arms, clean their muskets, tighten their belts. The smell of bread and smoke drifts through the air as fires are lit again. Cavalrymen polish sabers with quiet care. Officers speak in low voices, glancing toward the emperor's tent, waiting for the signal. Across the valley, the British and their allies are doing the same. The morning fog hides their movements, but the air is alive with quiet preparation. The clatter of harnesses, the muted thud of boots on wet ground. On the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean, Wellington's red-coated infantry forms lines, muskets stacked neatly beside them. Dutch and Belgian troops take their places alongside the British Guards. German soldiers from Hanover and Brunswick check their powder horns. At around 8 a.m., the sky begins to clear. The mist rises like breath from the earth. The sun, pale and uncertain, cuts through the last veil of cloud. For the first time, both armies can see each other across the shallow alley. A ripple of tension passes through the ranks. The soldiers know what is coming. Napoleon mounts his horse, a white charger, named Marengo, and rides forward with his staff. He surveys the enemy lines through his spyglass. He sees the ridge, the farmhouses, the hedgerows, the dark smudges of movement that mark the enemy's artillery positions. He nods to Marshal Ney, his trusted commander, fiery and fearless. "Prepare the men," Napoleon says. The signal guns fire at 11:35 a.m. The deep thunder of French cannon rolls across the fields. The Battle of Waterloo has begun. The first attack falls on the British right, at a farmhouse called Hougoumont, a sturdy stone complex surrounded by orchards and walls. Inside, British guards have barricaded doors and windows, turning it into a fortress. Napoleon orders it taken, believing it to be the key to the enemy's flank. The French advance through the wheat fields, their blue coats dark with damp. They shout and charge, bayonets glittering. Cannonballs scream overhead and crash into the walls. The air fills with smoke, thick and bitter. The defenders hold. British guards fire from the upper windows, reloading with trembling hands, black powder staining their faces. Flames leap from the barn as shells strike. Smoke pours out, choking the men inside. But they do not break. Hour after hour, the fight for Hougoumont rages. Men fall against the walls, bodies piled in doorways. At one point, French soldiers manage to break open a side gate, only to be trapped and slaughtered within minutes. The fighting is so fierce that Wellington later says, "The success of the battle turned upon the closing of the gates at Hougoumont." While the fight drags on there, Napoleon focuses his main attack on the center. His cannons open up, roaring in unison. The ground shakes. Each shot sends clouds of mud and flesh into the air. British infantry crouch behind the ridge, waiting. The cannonballs thud into the earth in front of them, spraying dirt, sometimes bone, and still, the French advanced columns of infantry move forward, their drums beating a steady rhythm. Boom, 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 like a great iron heart. Flags ripple above them. Officers shout orders over the thunder. Wellington watches from his horse atop the ridge, calm but pale. "Hold your fire," he says quietly. The men obey, waiting until the French are close, 50 yards, 40, 30. And then the ridge explodes in musket fire. The French columns waver, stumble, then charge again. Smoke rolls across the valley like fog. Muskets crack and reload, the rhythm mechanical, merciless. The smell of sulfur burns the throat. Napoleon's artillery pounds the ridge, trying to break the line. He rides among his men, his face expressionless, his eyes sharp. Every so often he stops, stares into the smoke, and listens to the rhythm of battle, to the sound that tells him whether the line is breaking or holding. At noon, a new report reaches him. Blücher's Prussians are on the move. They are not retreating. They are coming to join Wellington. Napoleon curses under his breath. He sends Marshal Grouchy with 30,000 men to block them, but it is too late. The Prussians are closer than he thinks. Back on the battlefield, the struggle grows more desperate. At 1 p.m., Napoleon orders an assault on La Haye-Sainte, another farmhouse at the center of the British line. The fight is brutal, hand to hand. Smoke, fire, scream. The walls crumble, muskets crack from windows. The French finally take it, but at enormous cost. Still, Wellington's line holds. The sun climbs higher. The heat mixes with the stench of blood and powder. Wounded men crawl through the mud, reaching for water, for help, for prayers that will not come. Horses scream, tangled in harnesses, eyes wild with terror. The air is thick, suffocating, alive with death. By late afternoon, the battlefield is a wasteland of smoke and shattered bodies. The French cavalry begins to move. Ney, impatient, believing the enemy is faltering, orders a massive cavalry charge, thousands of horsemen surging forward in glittering waves. They thunder across the valley, sabers raised, sunlight flashing on steel. It is one of the most magnificent sights ever seen on a battlefield, and one of the most tragic. The British infantry, trained and steady, form into squares, tight blocks of men 4 ranks deep, bayonets outward. As the cavalry charges, the squares stand immovable. The French sweep around them, circling, slashing, firing pistols, but the squares hold. When the horses break off, the British reload and fire again, smoke rising from within the formation like breath from a furnace. Over and over, Ney leads the charge. His horse is shot beneath him. He takes another, then another. By the end of the day, he will lose 5 horses and still keep fighting on foot, covered in mud and blood. From a distance, Napoleon watches. He cannot believe what he sees. His cavalry, brave and relentless, charging again and again into the same unbroken wall. "Where is my infantry?" he mutters. "Why is no one supporting them?" But by now communication is chaos. Orders are lost in the smoke. The field is too vast, the noise too great. The emperor's once perfect machine of war begins to falter. By evening, the thunder of guns grows deeper. The Prussians have arrived. Their dark uniforms appear like shadows on the French right flank. First a few, then hundreds, then thousands. Their drums echo through the woods. Napoleon realizes the truth. He is trapped. He orders the Imperial Guard, his last reserve, to prepare. These are his finest soldiers, veterans of Austerlitz and Jena, men who have never known defeat. They form ranks, silent and grim, their tall bearskin hats swaying as they march. As they advance through the smoke, the French soldiers cheer, crying, "Vive la Garde!" It is their last hope. Across the ridge, Wellington watches the movement through his spyglass. He turns to his aides and says quietly, "Now is the time." The British artillery opens fire once more. The Imperial Guard presses forward through the haze, through the cannon smoke, climbing the ridge. They meet musket fire head-on. The front ranks fall. The survivors close ranks and keep moving. They reach the top, and there, waiting for them, the British Guards rise from the grass. "Now, Maitland," Wellington shouts. The British line erupts in a sheet of flame. The Imperial Guard staggers, stunned. They try to rally, but another volley crashes into them. Then another. For the first time in history, the Guard begins to break. "La Garde recule." Someone cries, "And why, the Guard is retreating." The word spread like wildfire through the French ranks. Panic follows. What was once an army becomes a tide of fleeing men. Drums fall silent. The great machine of empire collapses into chaos. Night begins to fall. The air cools again and smoke drifts low over the corpses. Napoleon's horse stands trembling beside him. His face is pale, unreadable. He knows it is over. Waterloo is lost. In a few hours, the sun will set on the last day of his reign, and on the age of empires he created. The night returns, quiet, heavy, almost tender after the horror of the day. The candle that burned through the night before would never be lit again for Napoleon's glory. The same wind that once carried his banners now carries the smoke of his defeat. The faint hum of the battlefield fades. The rain has stopped again, but the world feels bruised. The wind moves through the fields, rustling torn flags and the whispers of the fallen. Smoke drifts slowly, the gray mist of evening merging with the breath of death. The guns have gone silent. The thunder, the fire, the roar, all gone. What remains now is the quiet of the dead. Across the muddy fields near Waterloo, tens of thousands lie still. Blue coats, red coats, brown and gray, all the colors of men now fade into the same earth. Horses lie tangled in harnesses, their great bodies still warm. Broken muskets stick from the ground like crosses. Torn flags flutter weakly in the wind. It is the evening of June 18th, 1815. The day that decided the fate of empires is over, and now comes the reckoning. The French army, and what remains of it, is in full retreat. Panic spreads faster than any command can stop it. Once proud soldiers who marched that morning with drums and banners now stumble through the night, drenched, wounded, terrified. Officers shout orders no one hears. Wagons overturn in the mud. Cannons are abandoned. The cry echoes through the dark. Sauve qui peut. Every man for himself, Napoleon rides among them silent. His horse moves slowly through the wreckage. Around him, his marshals try to gather order. Ney, exhausted, his face blackened with powder, his sword broken. Soult, grim and hollow-eyed. No one speaks to the emperor unless he speaks first. Napoleon's uniform is splattered with mud and blood. His hands shake slightly as he reins in his horse. His eyes stare straight ahead, unblinking. The night air is heavy, smelling of smoke, sweat, and iron. Every few moments, he glances toward the horizon, the road to France. He knows it is over. There are no more armies to raise, no more chances to gamble. The dream he built, of a united Europe under his code, his order. His name has fallen into the Belgian mud. He turns to his aide and murmurs, "It is finished." Then, after a pause, "Let us go." The retreat begins. Far behind them, Wellington sits his horse on the ridge where he has stood all day. His uniform is torn, his boots caked in mud. His face is pale, lined with exhaustion. Around him, aides report victory, numbers prisoners. He listens, barely nodding. There is no joy, only relief. He looks across the field, now quiet except for the cries of the wounded. A reporter would later say that Wellington wept when he saw it, that he dismounted, walked among the dead, and whispered, "I hope to God I have fought my last battle." For the men who survived, the victory feels hollow. The fields stink of death. Night falls, and the groans of the dying rise with the mist. Lanterns bob across the field as medics search for the living, calling out in the darkness. Somewhere in the mud, a French drummer boy still breathes, his drum shattered beside him. A British officer kneels, giving him water. Neither speaks. They only stare at each other, enemies who will die the same way under the same indifferent stars. By dawn, Napoleon's army is gone, scattered across the roads to Charleroi in France. Broken units drift like ghosts. Some throw away their weapons, others march barefoot. They no longer look like soldiers. They are survivors walking home from a dream that has ended. In Paris, the news arrives slowly, then all at once. Couriers gallop through the gates, their horses foaming, their uniforms torn. Ministers gather in silence. Crowds form in the streets, whispering, "Waterloo, defeat, the emperor lost." When Napoleon finally returns to the capital, the city does not cheer. There are no parades, no songs, no flags. He enters the Tuileries Palace quietly, slipping through a side door before dawn. His servants wait in silence. The clock ticks. He removes his coat, stained and heavy with the mud of Waterloo, and sets it aside. For a moment, he stands still, staring at the map of Europe on his wall, the same map he had redrawn a dozen times in his glory days. The borders now seem to blur under the flickering light. He whispers to himself, "Everything. All for nothing." Then, slowly, he sinks into a chair and closes his eyes. Outside, Paris begins to stir. The streets fill with rumor. Some still hope he will fight again, that he will summon another army. But Napoleon knows better. His marshals know too. France is weary. The people have no appetite for another war. The chambers of Parliament meet. Deputies demand that he abdicate again, this time for good. Angry voices echo through the hall. "The emperor has failed us. The country must be saved." Napoleon listens, silent. He has faced armies, conspiracies, betrayals, but this quiet rejection from his own government cuts deeper than any wound. On June 22, 1815, 4 days after Waterloo, he signs the document of abdication for the second time. His son, the King of Rome, barely a child, is named in name only as his successor. But everyone knows the empire is finished. As he lays down the pen, Napoleon says softly, "I have loved power too much to see it fall into weak hands." He stands, adjusts his coat, and looks once more toward the window. The sound of Paris beyond the walls and the clatter of wheels, the cry of vendor, feels distant, unreal. He turns to his secretary and says, "We are all mortal, but the name Napoleon will live outside. The sun shines over a city that no longer belongs to him." In the days that follow, the victors close in. The Prussian army enters France. British troops advance toward the capital. The Allies demand Napoleon's surrender. He considers escape, perhaps to America, where he dreams of starting a quiet life as a scholar or farmer. Ships wait at the port of Rochefort, but the British Navy blocks the coast. On July 15, 1815, Napoleon makes his choice. He boards a small boat and surrenders himself to the captain of the British ship HMS Bellerophon. To those who accompany him, he says, "I come, like Themistocles, to throw myself upon the hospitality of the British people." The captain salutes him with respect, but the world already knows that the once mighty emperor is now a prisoner. The voyage to England is somber. As the ship cuts through the gray waters of the Atlantic, Napoleon stands on the deck in his plain green uniform, watching the horizon. The sea wind stings his face. He says little. Occasionally he speaks with the sailors, curious, even kind, asking about their families, their home ports. But when he looks west, toward the open sea. There is a sadness in his eyes. He had dreamed of crossing that ocean as a conqueror, to challenge Britain itself. Now he crosses it in defeat. When they reach the English coast, crowds gather along the cliffs to catch a glimpse of him. The legend, the monster, the fallen emperor. Some cheer, some curse. Newspapers print his arrival in bold letters. But the British government has already decided he will not stay in Europe. He will not escape again. This time there will be no Elba, no return, no army waiting for him. He is to be sent far away, to a tiny island in the South Atlantic, a place so remote that no empire could reach him. Its name is St. Helena. In August 1815, Napoleon boards the ship Northumberland and sails south, into exile for the second and final time. The journey takes weeks. The ocean stretches endless in all directions, the waves dark and ceaseless. He spends his days pacing the deck, reading, staring at the horizon. Sometimes he talks to the crew about history, strategy, destiny. He tells them, "Waterloo will erase many memories, but it will also seal my legend." One sailor writes later, "He spoke as though time itself would remember him." And time did. When he finally arrives at St. Helena, the island seems to rise from the sea like a ghost, rocky, windswept, isolated. There are no cities, no armies, no crowds, just cliffs, grass, and endless ocean. He steps ashore quietly, escorted by British guards. The house they assign him is small, damp, and lonely. Longwood House perched high on the hills. The wind there never stops. The Emperor of Europe becomes a prisoner of waves and weather. Years pass. The world moves on. Kings dine in Vienna. The map of Europe is redrawn again, this time without his name. In America, young students read about him in books. In Paris, people whisper his stories by candlelight, some with pride, some with fear. On St. Helena, Napoleon walks alone among the rocks, thinking, always thinking. He dictates his memoirs to his few loyal companions. His words are calm but defiant. History, he says, is written by those who have conquered it. But he adds after a long pause, and yet, it is judged by time. He knows that he is both conqueror and prisoner, both legend and warning, and somewhere in that stillness, in that faraway ocean, another night falls. The sea hums softly beyond the cliffs. The candle burns low. Napoleon sits by the window, the wind pushing gently at the shutters. He is older now, his hair graying, his body weakened by illness. But his eyes still burn. He looks out at the horizon where the sky meets the sea and says quietly to himself, "All empires die, but dreams do not." He closes his eyes. For a moment the waves sound like drums. The wind through the grass sounds like marching men. And then, only silence. The man who once ruled Europe sleeps at last. The waves whisper against the black rocks of St. Helena. It is night again, quiet and unbroken, the kind of stillness that feels almost eternal. The candle inside Longwood House flickers, its faint glow painting the walls with trembling shadows. The sea wind moves through the shutters, carrying the scent of salt and damp earth. Somewhere far below, the Atlantic breathes, endless and indifferent. Napoleon Bonaparte has been here for nearly 6 years. The conqueror of Europe, the maker and unmaker of kingdoms, now lives in a small, creaking house on an island barely 70 square miles wide, a speck in the vast ocean, halfway between Africa and South America. Time moves differently here. The days are long, heavy with mist and drizzle. The wind is constant. Every morning he walks the garden path in his plain green coat, a faded memory of his old uniform, his hands clasped behind his back. He speaks little except to his few remaining companions, Generals Bertrand, Montholon, and Gourgaud, and the loyal valet Marchand. They keep him company, record his thoughts, and try to ease the weight of his exile. But nothing truly eases it. He was once surrounded by the sound of armies, the roar of crowds, the thunder of cannons. Now he hears only the ticking of the clock and the rustle of the sea. His enemies could not kill him on the battlefield, so they sent him here to be forgotten. But he refuses to be forgotten. He dictates endlessly, filling page after page with memories, speeches, reflections. The small study at Longwood becomes his new battlefield, the pen his sword. He tells his companions, "If I cannot rule by force, I will rule by memory." And so he begins to shape his legend. He recounts his youth in Corsica, the boy who dreamed of France. His rise through the revolution, the victories in Italy, the glory of Austerlitz, the reforms, the code, the empire. He remembers every detail, every map, every battle, every name. When he speaks, it is as though the walls fall away and the world returns. His voice grows strong, his gestures vivid, his eyes alive again. For a few hours each day, Napoleon becomes the emperor once more. Yet in the quiet hours of the evening, when the candles burn low and his companions have gone to rest, he sits alone and stares into the dark. The sea wind hums against the windows. His thoughts wander to his wife, Marie-Louise, who never came to visit, to his son, the King of Rome, growing up far away in Austria, a stranger to his own father. He sighs and murmurs, "He will know me only through history." Then, after a pause, "Let him learn that I was not a monster, only a man who saw too far." Life on St. Helena is harsh. The climate is damp. The food is poor. The British governor, Sir Hudson Lowe, treats him with cold formality, always suspicious, always watching. Every letter Napoleon writes is opened and read. Every visitor is questioned. He is a prisoner in all but name. Sometimes he lashes out, his temper flaring as it once did in council chambers. Other times he is strangely calm, almost philosophical. To one of his attendants he says, "They have given me an island for my kingdom. Very well, I will reign over myself." His health begins to fail. Stomach pains, fevers, weakness. The doctors argue among themselves. Some whisper of ulcers. Others suspect poison. Napoleon himself shrugs it off. "It is nothing," he says. Even Caesar died in the end. But as the months pass, he knows his body is betraying him. He writes fewer letters now, spends more time gazing out to sea. Meanwhile, across the world, his shadow still looms. In Europe, kings and diplomats celebrate their peace, the so-called concert of nations. They redraw borders, restore old dynasties, and promise stability. But the ideas Napoleon unleashed cannot be contained. His Code Civil, the Napoleonic Code, becomes the foundation of modern law across continents. His belief in merit over birth, his secular reforms, his administrative order, all of it spreads quietly but powerfully, long after his empire has fallen. In Spain and Latin America, revolutions break out. People rise against old monarchies inspired, even unknowingly, by his legacy. In Russia, Tsar Alexander I speaks of holy alliances yet fears the same revolutionary spark. In England, industrial smoke begins to rise, shaping a new kind of empire, one of trade and machines rather than crowns and swords. The world has changed, and in some way, it is still his world. A British visitor once asked a young French soldier why they still revered Napoleon even after his downfall. The soldier replied, "Because he showed us that one man could change everything." At Longwood, the days grow shorter. The ocean seems louder. The emperor grows weaker. He still dreams vividly. He dreams of battlefields, not of defeat, but of his great triumphs, Austerlitz, Marengo, Jena. He dreams of standing before his troops, the eagles shining in the morning light, the drums beating, his soldiers shouting, "Vive l'Empereur!" Sometimes when he wakes, he whispers, "They will come. My soldiers will come for me." But no one comes. One evening, he asked Marchand to bring him his old uniform, the dark green coat, the white vest, the small bicorn hat. He looks at them silently, runs his fingers along the worn fabric, then folds them carefully again. "Keep them close," he says. "When I am gone, they will know who I was." He dictates his final testament, a letter to the world, a mixture of pride, pain, and prophecy. In it, he declares, "I die before my time, murdered by the English oligarchy and its assassins. I wish my ashes to rest on the banks of the Seine, among the French people I loved so well." He names his son as heir, leaves words of affection for his companions, and gives orders for his few possessions, books, medals, keepsakes. He pauses often, his hand trembling. When he finishes, he says softly, "Now my story is complete." Outside, the Atlantic rolls endlessly beneath the stars. The nights are cooler now, the air heavy with mist. In the last weeks of his life, Napoleon asks to be moved near the window so he can see the sky. He says the sea reminds him of France, and always moving, always restless. He spends his final days in a kind of half-dream, sometimes speaking to his mother, sometimes to his generals long dead. One of his attendants records his last coherent words: France, Army, head of the army, Josephine. Then on May 5, 1821, at 5:49 p.m., Napoleon Bonaparte, once Emperor of the French, ruler of half the world, takes his final breath. A tropical storm passes over the island that night. The wind howls, the rain lashes the windows, and the sea roars as though the world itself is paying its last salute. His companions dress him in his uniform, the green coat, the white breeches, the small black hat upon his chest, and lay him in a simple coffin lined with tin. The next day, beneath a weeping sky, they bury him in the Valley of the Willows beside a spring he loved. There is no grand ceremony, no royal choir, only a few loyal friends, the sound of shovels, and the murmur of the ocean. Over the grave, one of them whispers, "Sleep. Sire, you have conquered enough." Years later, when the news reaches France, a wave of sorrow sweeps through the land. Even those who once opposed him speak of him now with awe and melancholy. He becomes something greater than emperor or general. He becomes legend. Artists paint him as a lonely figure staring into the sea. Poets call him a fallen star. Children whisper his name as though it were magic. Victor Hugo would later write, "The man had disappeared, but the phantom remained, and that phantom began to grow." In 1840, nearly 20 years after his death, King Louis-Philippe of France petitions the British government to return Napoleon's remains. The permission is granted. A French ship, La Belle Poule, sails to St. Helena under the command of the Prince de Joinville. The crew exhumes the coffin with solemn care. When they open it, they are stunned. Napoleon's body, preserved by the island's soil, appears almost untouched, as though asleep. Crowds line the streets of Paris when the ship returns. As the coffin passes, men remove their hats, women weep, veterans salute. The city that once betrayed him now welcomes him home. He is laid to rest in a grand tomb beneath the golden dome of Les Invalides, in the heart of the city he once ruled. The inscription reads simply, "Here lies Napoleon. The empire he built had crumbled, but the name had not. Time would continue to move forward, through revolutions, wars, and new empires, yet Napoleon's story would never fade. His rise and fall would become a mirror for the human spirit, its brilliance, its arrogance, its longing for greatness. Historians would debate his legacy, tyrant or visionary, hero or villain, but none could deny his impact. He had changed the world not only with armies but with ideas. He had shown that one man, armed with vision and will, could alter the course of history, and in doing so he had paid the ultimate price, the loneliness of power, the silence of exile. The candle burns low. The waves whisper against the cliffs. The night on St. Helena deepens. The man is gone, but the world he dreamed of still turns, forever changed by the choices he made in one lifetime, by one night. The night that ended it all. The night of Waterloo. The night has passed. The storm over St. Helena has gone silent. Morning light spreads slowly across the island, soft and golden, spilling over the hills and sea. The waves rise and fall, endlessly repeating the rhythm of the world. Somewhere beneath those cliffs, in a quiet valley shaded by willows, the most restless man who ever lived now sleeps. The empire is gone. Yet the echoes of that one night, the night of Waterloo, are still felt across centuries. History does not forget easily. Time softens faces, blurs details, buries the dead, but it cannot erase what was born out of that single turning point. Waterloo was not just the end of one man. It was the beginning of a new world. When the cannons went silent on that June evening in 1815, Europe did not simply return to peace. It entered a long, uneasy sleep, haunted by the memory of revolution, of empires, and of the people who had tasted both freedom and tyranny in the same lifetime. The victors, Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia, gathered to rebuild. They called it the Congress system, a grand experiment in balance and diplomacy. For the first time, nations tried to maintain peace not by conquest, but by negotiation, to shape the world through meetings instead of wars. It was imperfect, fragile and deeply conservative, but it worked, and for a time, the guns of Europe fell silent for nearly 40 years. And yet under that calm surface, the ideas Napoleon had spread, of equality before the law, of merit, of secular government, kept burning quietly like embers beneath the ashes. In France, the monarchy returned, but it was never the same. Kings now ruled cautiously, aware that the people had once overthrown them, and could again. The shadow of the revolution and the legend of Napoleon stood behind every throne. The peasants and the middle class who had risen under his reforms refused to go back to the old order. The Napoleonic Code remained the foundation of French law, shaping justice for generations. Schools, universities, military academies, all still bore his stamp. Even those who hated him could not erase him. A British historian once wrote, "We defeated Napoleon, but in doing so we adopted his ways." And indeed, Britain, the country that had fought him for 2 decades, emerged stronger after Waterloo. It became the unquestioned master of the seas, its empire expanding across continents. The balance of power Napoleon had shattered was rebuilt, but now it tilted toward London. The 19th century became the British century, a world of industry, colonies, railways, and steam. And in its political heart, the fear of another Napoleon lingered, shaping how Britain dealt with every rising power that followed. Meanwhile, in the small German states that had fought both with and against Napoleon, a new consciousness began to stir, the idea of unity. His wars had forced them to cooperate, to see themselves not as dozens of tiny kingdoms but as one people. The same was true in Italy. The dream of a united nation, free from Austrian rule, began to take shape. Decades later, both Germany and Italy would rise, their creators inspired in part by the man who had once ruled them as a foreign emperor. Across the ocean in Latin America, another fire spread. Leaders like Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín watched Napoleon's rise and fall closely. They saw in him both the power and peril of revolution. They learned that empires could fall, that a new world could be born through struggle. From Venezuela to Argentina, independence movements lit up the map. Colonial rule began to crumble, and though Napoleon never set foot there, his ghost seemed to cross the Atlantic with them. The spirit of ambition, of destiny, of the belief that one person could remake the world. Even in the United States, far from Europe's wars, the name Napoleon carried weight. Americans admired his brilliance, his energy, his vision of progress through merit, yet they also feared the dangers of absolute power. Thomas Jefferson once wrote, "I confess that I looked upon Napoleon as the most extraordinary man of the age, yet a warning to all republics that duality, admiration and caution, when still defines how much of the world sees power today." In art and culture, Napoleon's image grew far beyond the man himself. Painters portrayed him as both hero and demon, poet and tyrant. Writers turned him into symbol and myth. Byron wrote of him with awe. Victor Hugo mourned him. Tolstoy in War and Peace made him the mirror of human ambition, the spark that reveals both greatness and vanity. The 19th century could not escape him. He became a part of the world's imagination, a symbol of what it means to rise, to fall, and to be remembered. Even those born long after his death could feel his presence. In the smoky salons of Paris, young artists whispered about destiny and greatness. In political clubs, students spoke of the man of the century. In the small villages of France, old veterans sat by their hearths and told stories of him to wide-eyed children. "I saw him once," they would say. "He rode past us, small, pale, with eyes that burned like fire." And those children grew up with that image of glory, courage, and the endless march toward history. Yet the legacy of Waterloo was not only myth, it was a warning. It showed the world how fragile empires could be, how swiftly fortune could turn. It reminded kings and generals that ambition, unchecked, could destroy even the strongest of men. Every great leader after Napoleon, from Bismarck to Churchill, from Stalin to Kennedy, studied him. Some tried to imitate him. Others tried to avoid his fate, and always. The lesson of that night remained. Power without humility is doomed to collapse. In the classrooms of military academies, cadets still trace the maps of Waterloo, studying his tactics, his brilliance, his mistakes. The field itself remains sacred ground, dotted with memorials and silent monuments. Visitors walk its ridges in the mist, listening to the wind, and if they close their eyes, they can almost hear it, the echo of drums, the cry of the charge, the heartbeat of history. 200 years have passed, Yet the story still feels alive, because it was not just the story of a battle. It was the story of humanity's reach for greatness, and the price it demands. Napoleon once said, "Glory is fleeting, but obscurity is forever." He understood, perhaps better than anyone, that to change the world is to invite both admiration and hatred, that every dream of power casts a shadow. Waterloo became the night when that shadow took shape, when the dream met its limit, when the unstoppable man met the immovable world. But in his fall, he left behind something stronger than an empire, a question that still haunts us. How far should one person go in pursuit of destiny? The narrator's voice softens like a fire burning down to embers. Imagine for a moment standing on that battlefield today. The rain has long since stopped. The grass has grown back. The cannons are gone, but the earth still remembers. Each step you take is over ground that once shook with thunder. Each breath you draw carries the memory of those who fought and fell. And above it all, the wind whispers, not words, but something deeper, older. The reminder that history is never just in books. It is in the soil, the stones, the air we breathe. The night of Waterloo ended long ago, but its echoes have shaped every dawn since. The scene fades, from the fields of Belgium to the golden dome of Les Invalides, where sunlight falls softly upon the marble floor. There lies the man who changed the map of the world, not as a ruler, not as a warrior, but as a story. Visitors walk slowly around his tomb, their footsteps echoing under the great dome. Some whisper, some simply stand in silence. In that silence, one can almost hear his voice again, calm, proud, unyielding. I have seen the face of destiny, and it looked back at me. And perhaps somewhere beyond time, that voice still echoes over the plains of history, reminding us that even in defeat, greatness can endure, because sometimes one night is enough to change everything. One night to end an empire. One night to begin a legend. One night that changed history.